The lecture for October and November of 2025 is going to be Patrick Lecture 48, The Life Force in the Universe. There are some lectures that as I read them, they explode in my mind. And I get so many ideas from them and so many directions to go in that it just doesn't fit into a four-part format. When that happens immediately, I do a two-parter. Sometimes I'll just get one layer, and then years later, I'll get another layer, and that's when I will repeat a lecture and do another study guide because I have a different perspective or different ways of presenting and showing the material. But when it happens all at once, it feels like I'm wrangling an octopus. I'm trying to get it down to 4 arms, and it winds up being 8, and I'm glad it was only 8. So the life force in the universe. In week 1, the guide is presenting that it is disturbed consciousness that petrifies the life force. So, of course, what he does is he starts talking about what is life force. And according to the guide, life force is everywhere. Everything, every atom, every element, everything contains life. Now, we are used to using the word life to represent biological life, something that moves or has some agency or grows in a certain way. We're not used to thinking of rocks as alive. Now, geologists are, they see the formation process and the change and transition, so they may find this a little bit easier. But for many people, they divide the world into animate and inanimate objects. And so there's life, and then there's the other stuff. But spiritually, it's all life. I like to think of this as on the atomic level, that where if there's an atom, it's moving. And if it's moving, it's alive. This actually goes a bit further than that and says it doesn't even have to move. It can be completely petrified and still be life with the potential to unpetrify, which will be next week, which will be exploring petrified life force. But let's stick with life is everywhere, life is everything. And then the guide says something curious. He says that life is. It doesn't do, it doesn't move, it doesn't prove, it doesn't work, it doesn't produce, it just is. And this is also distinct from what we think of life being. And he goes on to talk about state of consciousness. I'll get there in a moment. But that growth and transformation, I'm going to shift to growth and transformation, is how life, spiritual life moves. And it moves by unifying. So while there is life in rocks, soil, dirt, trees, animals, plants, etc., this is all life. There are different forms of life. The guide is calling this split consciousness of various kinds. And in other lectures, he talks about how life may be split so many ways that it comes together as plants and animals evolve, that there is a chain here. There is a chain of development. And that humans represent the last link in the chain of development before a more spiritual existence. Not that we are the best, we're just the last link in the chain. And that other life forms are split more than we are. But that human beings are still split, but we show our split in terms of gender. That's the primary split in the organism called mankind versus mental splits is our genders. And it led me to wonder, because in society nowadays, there's a big movement towards blurring, if not erasing, gender differences. And what I like to do is I like to take current events and see them from a spiritual perspective in a what-if sense. Since I don't know spirit, I'm guessing. But all of a sudden I wondered if there wasn't an urge to overcome a split, whereas the reality is it's going to be overcome over time. But sometimes when a human being knows something's going to happen, it wants it to happen now. So there's a place of wanting the healing to happen before it's time, which involves a doing, a push, a trying to, which is not bad in and of itself, but it may or may not help the transformation process, the underlying movement and growth. So it's a combination of events. But that's what came to me when I read this section about how our last division is gender. Now, the guide talks about 3 states of consciousness in this. And he says the first state is without self-awareness. This is the state of consciousness of rocks and possibly of plants and some of the animal kingdom, not necessarily all, so that they exist, they have consciousness, but if you don't have a timeline, if you don't have self-awareness, it's a day, a month, a year. There's no way to track it. There's no apparent change, or if there is change, you don't have the awareness to see the change. And so you're in a timeless state of being. Then there is a state of self-awareness. Man is there. The guide does not go into an intricate set of biological examples, but we have learned that some animals have a degree of self-awareness. Well, that's because it's not an or, it's not if you're at this stage, you have this, and if you're at this stage, you don't. It's a graduated line. So of course there would be blurs between the evolutionary progression. So at stage 2, you've got self-awareness. Now, there's another lecture, Patrick Lecture 127, that I teach a lot. You've probably heard me teach it. It's called The 4 Stages of Spiritual Evolution. And that is automatic reflex, which means without awareness, understanding, and knowledge. So you don't know much about the lack of awareness phase, similar to stage 1 of consciousness. In the awareness stage, the guide describes this as the longest and most painful stage. And I reiterate this often because it's one thing to say it once, but when you're in a stage of awareness, of becoming aware of a problem, you really need to hear it more than once. You need to hear that you're not a failure because you haven't conquered it the minute you felt it or the minute you became aware of it. So awareness requires that you go to some understanding. You take the understanding, you go back, you become more aware, back and forth and back and forth. And this can take decades or a lifetime or several lifetimes until you reach a knowing. Now, what I like to do is I like to emphasize the easier versions. The spiritual awareness stuff is about the harder lessons, the harder spiritual lessons that we're here to learn. But there are easy ones. There are the lessons where it's don't drop the glass on the floor, it shatters. Now, those of you who have dropped glasses on floors and have them shattered, you're probably a little more careful about holding on to that glass. The awareness of what can happen leads you to behave differently. You have awareness of the shattering. You have a semi-understanding of what happened. If nothing else, it broke. And you hold on better. And then there's a knowing. At some point, you've got an intuitive feel for, I push the glass and it's tilting. There's a knowing of risk. There's an understanding and a knowing. So this happens in many, many stages of life. It happens in reading, where you have to work at every single word. And then comes a magical moment where your eyes fly across the page and you pick up these symbols and you can actually read rather than translate symbols into words. I often use driving because I learned to drive as a young person and I was not very good at it and terrified my instructor. I got better, but it's a lot of controls to handle at once. And in moving traffic, it's terrifying. It's a big deal to learn to drive, much harder than learning to ride a bike. And yet, at some point, you've learned it, you've practiced it, you understand what to do, what not. You understand the mechanism, the process enough so that you can relax. And you drive without a great deal of conscious effort. And then there's a knowing where you drive, it feels almost unconscious, and then you become alert because something struck you as unusual. Now you need all your consciousness. There's a knowing. So this stage of self-awareness in the states of consciousness has the same thing. Now, in terms of self-awareness, the self is multidimensional. We have a body that we need to learn and operate. We have emotions and feelings. We have the mind. We have the will and ego, what drives the mind. And then we have the spirit, a little bit of Maslow's hierarchy. All these aspects need to be learned as part of self-awareness. And then there's the uniqueness of who we are, what we want, what we're doing here, what we're trying to accomplish, and how we can do that within a very complex social structure. So self-awareness is a big category. And then the third state would be a combination of these two, where you have a timeless state with self-awareness. Now, this is the floating, calm, meditative state. We can achieve this for short periods of time, but that's not where we live. We live, let us say, in a laboratory where we're learning to become self-aware and learn to handle that self-awareness so that we can graduate one day and go into timeless self-awareness. So that's the first batch of information for Patrick Lecture 48, The Life Force in the Universe. Take a look at the lectures, see what you think, and thanks for listening.